Good morning, everyone. Thank you, Matthew. I've felt the warm Texas welcome as well, so thank you. I've never been here before until yesterday, and already the impression is just fabulous. And especially from that opening speech from Mayor Rawlings. You've said it's a young city, but wow, what incredible history this city has. It's just inspiring. And it's a reminder that it's not just this arts district that we're in now that epitomizes this transformation of this city, but it's also the way in which the city has continued to rise up the economic value chain as well and reinvent itself. So it's across the spectrum that this city is such an amazing example or role model for other places. And it's going to have to be. If this is going to be the century of cities, then there are a lot of places around the world that do have to, in fact, reinvent themselves. And it's not an easy task to accomplish it all. So what I want to do today, just briefly, is to lay out some of the context and challenges that cities around the world are facing before inviting our brilliant opening panel of speakers to comment on the issues that they are truly the experts in. So let's start with looking at what you might call big data, in the literal sense of very big numbers. Now, already 50% of the world's population is urban, living in cities. That is increasing by about 10% per year, meaning that by 2035, 70% of the world's population will indeed be urban. And the number of megacities is also increasing annually, those cities that have over 10 million in population. By 2025, the top 600 cities in the world economically one-sixth of those cities will be in China, and they represent the majority of the world's GDP. If we focus on, or if we combine China and India together in this analysis, the numbers become completely staggering in terms of the pace of urbanization. So a population the size of the United States of America is moving into cities in China in the coming years. About half of India's population is going to be living in cities with a population of about 1 million or more. So the two largest countries in the world demographically are really becoming these collections of cities. But how will they reinvent themselves? How are they going to adapt? How are they going to transform on the models or along some of the models that we are going to discuss today? How are they going to build the capacity to absorb greater populations? How are they going to integrate new technologies to become more dynamic economically and culturally? You know, there are cities like Shanghai, Dubai, Singapore that have become magnets for investment, magnets for hardworking people from around the globe. But as notable as their growing vertical dimensions is also the horizontal. So there you get the animation about how cities, as I said, like Shanghai, Singapore, and Dubai have been growing to absorb investment, to absorb more populations. Now, as I said, equally impressive is the growing horizontal footprint. The satellite view that shows us that cities are not really just dots on a map, right? They're patches that are expanding. This is what Google Maps calls the ground truth view of cities. And when we think about cities as these patches rather than as dots, we realize just how vast the scale of cities is becoming, from 1% the surface area of the world growing towards 5%, meaning that just the urbanization that I've mentioned so far is going to require a surface area about the size of South Africa to absorb, with more to come. So let's put up on a map what cities look like when they're not just dots, but rather when they are these patches, when they are these clusters or corridors. And that's what the world is effectively becoming. Waiting for the next slide again. There we go. So think of the world not just as these tiny dots, but these patches, these clusters of city clusters that are increasingly bound together through dense infrastructure corridors. Now, of course, you can see Dallas-Fort Worth is one of them. And as I learned from Mayor Price yesterday evening, if high-speed rail projects do really take off in the United States, Dallas-Fort Worth will be the first to get it. You are ready politically and infrastructurally, and that will cut the commute between Dallas and Fort Worth down to a mere 7 or 8 minutes, I'm told, which is exactly an example of how you can bind these cities together and make them more efficient and achieve those economies of scale. And there are many of them around the world. With good reason, Sao Paulo, which hosted the New Cities Foundation Summit last year, is both a city and a state. For any of you who have been there, you see the enormous scale. It really isn't done justice by a little dot on the map, is it? There's others in the United States, and then if you look towards Asia, again, the concentration and growth of these clusters is astounding. Africa as well, with Lagos, Abu Dubai, I put in quotes, because if you spent any time there in the 1970s or 80s, they were about 100 miles apart with just desert in between. Today, if you travel between Abu Dhabi and Dubai, you see that it's increasingly a built-up urban corridor, so hence people call it Abu Dubai now. India has a couple of these, the greater Delhi area, the Mumbai-Pune, two very important financial and technological centers connected by an expressway. And the original megalopolis is, of course, the Tokyo-Nagoya-Osaka corridor, which has over 80 million people. If we zoom in on just China and look at what are the three major megacity clusters in China, the Bohai Ring around Beijing, the Yangtze Delta, Shanghai, Pearl River Delta of southern China, the population of just those three is larger than the top 10 non-Chinese cities in the world today. And this actually doesn't even include the Chongqing-Chengdu corridor, which if you throw that in really sort of tips the scales enormously. And what the Chongqing-Chengdu axis, if you will, really demonstrates is the way in which cities have to municipally redefine themselves, administratively redefine themselves, to capture the ways in which these cities are not really distinct spaces anymore, but are really fusing together. And the best example of this is the Pearl River Delta region of southern China, which we tend to think of as Hong Kong. And Hong Kong, we think historically, is the place that embodies the model of one country, two systems. But if you travel there today, you can see that that terminology no longer really works. I've been traveling to this part of China for about 10 years. And last summer, I decided to just do sort of a multimodal road trip around this ring or arc. And if you can start in Hong Kong and very easily take the metro into Shenzhen, which is more state-run. So you go from open and liberal Hong Kong towards more state-directed Shenzhen, up to the very heavily industrialized Dongguan area, towards Guangzhou, a major regional capital, which has really transformed itself from an industrial center to a financial center. It has a Zaha Hadid-designed opera house today. Over to the other side, more industrial areas, the Zhongguan and Zhuhai special development areas, down to open, freewheeling, gambling haven of Macau. These actually belong to totally different political geographies in a way, and yet the mayors, the authorities have been collaborating to build the transportation networks and the customs agreements to allow people and goods and trade to move so much more freely around this region. So it's no longer one country, two systems. It's becoming just one mega region. And in fact, the Pearl River Delta, in terms of its economy, the per capita income of this region is larger than that of Shanghai. And its combined GDP would alone make this city, this mega city, a member of the G20 group of countries. And again, this is just one part of China. But it represents the triumph, in a way that Dallas and Fort Worth do, of functional geography over political and administrative geography. And when we think about cities in this way, it's not just based on their sovereignty, but their capacity to make their own decisions, to set their own policies. That is spilled over into diplomacy as well, hence Diploma City, or Diploma City, depending on how you want to pronounce it. But it combines certainly my passions for diplomacy and for cities. And you can see that around the world, you don't have to be a capital city of a country to be a diplomatic powerhouse. You can see that in the ways in which New York City, of course, Dubai, Istanbul, Mumbai, Frankfurt, and other cities are really drivers of commercial diplomacy, of environmental diplomacy, and so on. And this is nothing new, of course. In the history of diplomacy, from ancient Mesopotamia through Renaissance Italy, it has always been cities that are actually the drivers of exchange and of communication across societies. But this is happening on a whole different scale. So is it any wonder that there are more mayors serving as heads of state today, sitting heads of state today, than ever in history? And that number is growing all the time. We see from Mexico to Nigeria to Turkey to Indonesia, mayors are increasingly becoming leading candidates to become heads of state, or already are. And because they've built their credentials on local accomplishments. Whenever I meet mayors around the world, they're always saying, I know how to collect the trash. You know, they've demonstrated a municipal track record and ability to govern that they can then take to a larger scale. And those accomplishments make them already well-suited to be national and international leaders. Well, what does it take to be a leader of a global city today? There are certain challenges that they have to be prepared for. And one of them, most certainly, is the ability to manage diverse and multi-ethnic societies. Cities like Dubai, Toronto, Singapore, and so forth are really as much foreign as they are national today. They are polyglot melting pots. They really give new meaning to the term cultural capital, don't they? But their leaders don't have the luxury of treating immigration as a temporary condition. It's a permanent reality. You know that very well here, in fact, in Dallas-Fort Worth. And their mayors, they can't offer citizenship to foreigners, but they have to find a way to make everyone feel like a stakeholder and be a stakeholder in that society. Around the world today, we see that countries are tearing themselves apart over ethnic, religious, and sectarian differences, but successful cities, we know, cannot afford to do that. Nor can they afford to be so stratified that the city feels like 2 or 3 or 4 cities at the same time, with walls that divide people based on their access or their income. And that kind of inequality has consequences. We cannot separate the images that you see here, which are from Occupy Wall Street, the London riots, Gezi Park in Istanbul, Tahrir Square in Cairo. We can't separate the images that are defining our news today we can't understand it aside from thinking about the context of urban inequality, young populations that are unable to access the promise of urban life. Which brings us to the ultimate challenge, or paradox, if you will. We are a rapidly urbanizing planet. We are building an urban coastal civilization. Most of the major cities in the world today and most of the new cities that we're building are on the ocean's coast. And we're doing so at a time when we have locked in rising sea levels that are going to affect at least 4 to 5 million people in the United States, upwards of 200 million people in Asia. The most recent IPCC report, the International Panel on Climate Change, for the first time in its report that was just issued a month or 2 ago, talks about the need for relocation strategies for populations in the event of these kinds of major natural disasters that we're seeing with increasing frequency in Asia, in the Middle East, in Latin America, and around the world. And this is going to require not just trillions of dollars of new investment in cities, but entirely new urban concepts and strategies, backup plans, if you will, because we have put all of our eggs in the city's basket. Right? What is our redundancy? What is our ability to absorb the stress and the shock of great natural disasters? So these are some of the opportunities. These are some of the challenges. The questions that we're going to be asking in the next few days are cities the solution to these problems? Are new cities the solution? How do we transform the metropolises that we have today? Which leaders are demonstrating the vision, the strategy, the ability to execute on those strategies?